Hey friends, and welcome back to our series on studying effectively for GCSEs and A-levels. In this video, we will be talking about how we can go about staying focused during our study sessions, so let's get straight to the video. So one thing that the author Nate Isle talks about frequently is being indistractable, which is arguably the most important skill for our century, given that we're surrounded by so many distractions these days. In his book, Indistractable, he talks about how we have both internal and external triggers. Internal triggers are any uncomfortable sensations we have, whether it be boredom, stress, anxiety, and many other emotional states. In short, the reason we look for distractions is to avoid dealing with these uncomfortable sensations. For example, it could be feeling stressed over an upcoming topic test because you haven't studied for it, and to avoid dealing with this feeling of stress, you let yourself get distracted and scroll through Instagram or something, which leads you to feel even more stressed afterwards, and the cycle just ends up repeating. Or you may be in a study session and begin to find it boring and wish to escape that emotional state of boredom by instead playing a game or watching YouTube or something, in which case it can be useful to perhaps play some music to make studying a bit more interesting, or deciding to study for an hour then playing 10 minutes of a game and repeating this process over and over, or even studying with friends to make it a bit more fun. Essentially, monitoring your emotional state and dealing with these internal triggers appropriately as they come up with solutions such as the one I mentioned before can be useful for helping you to avoid looking for distractions to begin with. If you want to learn more about these internal triggers, then you can search for the term indistractable Nate Isle on Google or YouTube and read some of his articles or watch a video or two of him speaking, or even read his book if you want to. Now, the next and more obvious of the two are the external triggers. This may be your phone being at arm's length away, or having the television on, or having something like Facebook open on a tab on your computer. And there are a number of ways to deal with these external triggers, like turning your phone off and putting it in another room, or if you're worried that your parents may have to call you in case of emergency, you can put it in silent on your room in your closet or something. But go to settings to make sure that only certain contacts can still call you through silent mode. There are many articles explaining how you can set this up on your own phone if you're interested. And say that when you're using a computer to study and you find yourself opening up Messenger or going to Twitter in a new tab or something like that, then maybe install Chrome extension Stay Focused can help you to prevent yourself from going on these websites outside of these certain hours that you block out in your day. Or if you want to take the extra step, then using a program like Cold Turkey can block websites across all browsers, and if you pay for the premium version, then you can also block individual programs like games during fixed hours of your day. And there are many other things that you can also do to reduce these external triggers, and I mean, sure, for most of them you could do something like fiddling around and finding a way around this thing and still get distracted, but usually the effort required to do this for most people is too much, which prevents them from doing it to begin with. On that note, Nate Isle also writes about something in his book called the 10-minute rule, in which he says that he will allow himself to get distracted by something, but only after waiting 10 minutes after the distraction comes to mind. And usually this is enough to make him forget about the distraction after waiting 10 minutes. But whilst I don't do this personally, I do something similar. Essentially, I keep a piece of paper or a post-it note with me, and any distractions that come to mind when studying, I'd write them down on this piece of paper. For example, when I'm working and I suddenly start wondering what someone I went to school with is up to nowadays, or whether a new episode of a show came out that I like, then I write both of these down on this piece of paper. And just the process of writing it down makes it feel like I've already done the task. And after my work session is over, then I'm taking a break, I would look at the list and realize that I don't really care what such and such a person is up to nowadays, and I was just making up excuses to not do work. But I do care when the next episode of such and such a show is coming out, so I would quickly look that up during my break as well. Generally, I find that for most of the distractions that come to mind, I don't care about, but for some of them I do, so I would batch them all together and allow myself to quote-unquote be distracted briefly during any breaks. What I also try to do is to make a checklist or a plan for the following day before going to bed. Generally, I find that I'm more likely to be distracted on a day when I don't have a clear idea of what I should be doing. And if I don't know what I'm going to be doing on that day, then I also don't know what I'm getting distracted from anyway, which sort of makes sense. If your plan is to just study for the entire day, then unfortunately that isn't specific enough. Instead, you should try to be specific by saying something like, I'm going to make flashcards on topic X, do 5 practice questions on topic Y, or even do, say, the 2017 past paper on subject Z. Having a clear idea of what you will be doing and in what order, maybe using a daily planner like I mentioned in a previous video on the series, can be helpful in helping you reduce distractions and helping you know exactly what to be focusing on that day. Now, the most useful technique that I have found for staying focused is called the Pomodoro Technique. It's quite a popular technique, so if you have heard of the technique before, then you can stop watching the video and I will see you next one. But for those of you who haven't heard of it, essentially the Pomodoro Technique is a system for helping you stay focused for small intervals by having breaks in between. Basically, what you do is you decide on a task, whether it be doing some practice questions on a topic, and then you set a timer for 25 minutes, which is called a Pomodoro session. During the session, you try to focus on the task at hand and avoid all other distractions. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break and then repeat for another 25-minute Pomodoro session on the same task if you haven't completed it, or a different one if you have. And then after every 4 Pomodoro sessions, you take a longer 15-minute break. Now, this doesn't have to be a rigid structure, it's merely a guideline, so you can vary the times to whatever suits you, whether it be that you can focus for 50 minutes and take a 10-minute break, or for even 90 minutes and take a 20-minute break. It's really up to you, and it's about finding a combination that works for you. But 25 minutes, 5 minutes is a good starting point because it isn't too long for most people, and it's still a good length of time that you can get a decent amount of work done in. But if your timer goes off and you still want to work for longer, then you don't have to take a break if you don't want to. You can continue to focus on the task at hand. But if you find yourself losing focus after, say, 40 minutes, then you may want to use, say, a 40-minute work and 10-minute break system instead. Now, there are 2 things I like about this technique. Firstly, it can be helpful to break down large tasks into smaller subtasks so they're more manageable. For example, let's say your goal is to go through the entire topic of electrolysis. We may set 2 25-minute Pomodoros to watch some videos explaining the topic, whilst making some brief notes, and then spend another Pomodoro session turning these brief notes into flashcards, and then finally spend 2 more Pomodoro sessions doing some exam questions. Breaking down large tasks like these makes them seem more manageable and achievable, and most importantly, ensures we're taking breaks regularly. It's a good idea to step back from our work and allow ourselves to relax, as we can often come back knowing the solution to an exam question that we've been struggling with, or some concept that we've been struggling to understand could finally click in our heads whilst on our break. This is pretty much what we mentioned about focus and diffused thinking before in the video on tackling hard questions. And this brings me on to an important point. During our short 5-minute breaks, we should try not to go on our phones because we can easily end up spending the next 30 minutes on them. I find it more helpful to walk around, get some water, do some push-ups, and read a few pages of a book, or even watch a short TED Ed video. Basically, anything that can help me step back from work and reset my mind. But if I wanted to achieve more diffused thinking during the breaks, then I would try to avoid doing anything that requires my focus. Now, there are a number of apps that you can use for both phones and computers, which I will link down below. But personally, I avoid using apps because when stopping or setting the Pomodoro timer, there's a risk of checking Instagram or Snapchat, which is only a few taps away, and the next thing we know, we've spent the last 15 minutes scrolling through it. Because of this fact, I prefer to use a physical timer, which I bought off Amazon, and I will leave a link in the description down below. Whilst it is £14, the return on investment for me has been huge because I no longer have the risk of getting distracted by apps on my phone or on my computer when keeping track of Pomodoros, and I don't have to rely on any devices. Also, the ringing sound it makes when it reaches 0 is loud enough that I can hear it over any music that's being played, but the volume can also be reduced. And I think the most important thing to remember when using the Pomodoro technique is to make sure your sleep is a priority, which means going to bed and waking up at the same time every day and getting at least 8 hours if you can. I generally cannot function well with anything less than that, and remember that doing 1 Pomodoro with a fresh and well slept brain is much better than doing 2 or 3 with a tired one. But yeah, that's basically it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.